matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Welcome to Doomed to Fail, the podcast where we ignore all the red flags. I'm Farz, joined by my co-host, Taylor, and every week we'll be bringing you two tales, one historic and one true crime related, of relationships that were doomed to fail. Taylor, what's our signature drink this week?
Thank you, Farz. So this week we'll be going back to ancient Rome. So our cocktail is going to be a glass of red wine. But you have to drink it laying down on a couch covered in pillows, and you don't hold the glass. Someone else holds the glass and pours it into your mouth, and then they back up and they spill the red wine on the carpet. So you sentence them to death by being eaten by a lion. So that's our cocktail. And then our mocktail, because we know not everyone is a drinker. So our mocktail is one of those mustard yellow Tupperware cups from the 80s. It is stained and it is crusty and it's been on the floor for a few years, and it's also just empty. There's no actual liquid in it. It's just this dirty cup on the floor. And Farz, I think you'll cover why we have that dirty cup on the floor.
I will absolutely be covering why this disgusting cup is on the floor. If you do have a dirty yellow Tupperware cup from the 80s, please wash it before you drink anything out of it. But that's it. Today we're going to be covering Emperor Nero of Rome and the Turpin family and try to find the red flags, which are going to be aplenty. So I'm going to dive right in. We're going to start on the true crime side of the equation. And as usual, I'm going to ask you, Taylor, being the true crime aficionado that you are, are you familiar with the Turpin family case?
I am, and I kind of feel like I want to gag because it's so gross. I don't know all the details. Luckily, but I guess I'll get to know them now. But yeah, I imagine it's real gross and sad.
Very gross.
Sad,
very gross. Yeah. Very sad.
Ugh.
So to kick things off, do you remember Harry, who's Jeff Daniels' character in Dumb and Dumber?
Yes.
Okay, picture that guy from now on every time I bring up David Turpin. He looks like he's wearing a mop on his head. And it also looks silky smooth for some reason. So he apparently cares. He cares enough about his hair to condition and moisturize it, but not enough to actually cut it and modernize it and make it look normal, which is very, very interesting.
Okay, great. Got it.
Okay, perfect. So with that preamble, let's start in on David and Louise Turpin. Right at the top, I'm going to blame religion and power dynamics for this story. Religion tends to play in quite a bit, as we've seen in the last episode as well, into my true crime cases. David and Louise met when he was 23 and she was 16. Yeah. Obvious power dynamic, right?
Yeah.
I get that a 7-year age gap doesn't mean much when you're 40 and she's 33. But by this time, David was a computer engineer. He had the air of a man who had his shit together to a 16-year-old, right?
Yeah, totally. It's a huge difference. Yeah.
Huge difference. From what I could gather, they only were together for about a year before getting married in 1985. And the circumstances under which they got married were also really interesting. They kind of absconded with each other without the parents, with her parents completely disapproving of this, trying to get married to each other, and then somehow they came back home and they squared things away with her parents and were able to get married. But it was kind of like he basically was trying to take advantage of a 16-year-old is how I interpreted this.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way to not, there's a thing, if you're underage, then it's against your will. There's no such thing. You can't consent if you're a child. So,
Exactly. So going into a bit of their individual histories, Louise seems to have had a really rough childhood. According to her sister, Teresa, their mother would sell the girls to local pedophiles.
Ew, oh God.
Yeah. Teresa is quoted as saying, this is all a quote, "He would slip money into my hands as he molested me. Oh. I can still feel his breath on my neck as he whispered, 'Be quiet.' We begged her not to take us to him, but she would simply say, 'I have to clothe and feed you.' Louise was abused the worst. He destroyed my self-worth as a child, and I know he destroyed hers too." This is Teresa, the sister, talking, which is crazy. I didn't have an exact age range here where this was going on, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's
No.
awful no matter what.
So, I
And
mean, it sounds like she never had a chance. Like,
yeah,
ugh, 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 ugh,
yeah,
it's
she kind of
terrible.
started off with a bad hand.
Mm-hmm.
Using
Yeah.
poker terms, which I'm terrible at. And the story was actually corroborated. So they have another sister who's named Elizabeth. She corroborated the sexual abuse story too, but then she also leveled some pretty stupid accusations against Louise to kind of impute her character and justify what she did. She
Hmm.
wrote a book. The book is called Sisters of Secrets. And so, for context, Teresa was of the opinion, I can't believe that my sister would do this. This is insane. Whereas Elizabeth was of the opinion of course she could do this. Look at her past, look at her history, look at what she was involved in. But they're
Hmm.
so stupid. She accused her of drinking, smoking, going to bars, practicing witchcraft,
I love that. I
gambling,
love that for her. Yeah.
eating steaks, and then she made some like vague sexual promiscuity claims against her. Don't know exactly what those were related to, but all this sounds like. I mean, eating snakes is a little bit unusual unless you're in Louisiana, but the
Oh,
rest
I
of
thought you
this,
said steak. I was like, that seems fine, but snakes. I see. I get it. I get
the slithering kind, not the delicious cow kind. Um,
it.
but all this kind of sounds like just edgy emo shit that anybody would do when
Doesn't
they're.
even sound edgy.
It
Like,
is, yeah, exactly right. It's fairly standard operating procedure for most kids.
yeah.
Um, So Elizabeth sounds like, going back to our theme from last week, a bit of a wet noodle. So we're
Yeah,
not a huge fan of Elizabeth because she basically tried to find any reason to justify what ended up happening, which we're about to dive straight into.
totally.
But before we dive into it, building back on the characters at hand here, David was kind of the flip side of that equation. He was a bit of a baby straight edge. He was part of the Bible, chess, and science clubs. Made really good grades, and actually, I ended up going back and finding his high school yearbook picture.
Oh
He
my God,
had the
amazing.
hair. He had the mop hair in high school. It was absolutely incredible. He looked exactly the same.
Oh my gosh, that kind of thing feels like permanent. Maybe it was just permanent. Like you just can't do anything about it. That's so
Yeah,
funny.
yeah. Um, I didn't put this in the outline, but I wanted to call this out because if any of you have look up a picture of these two, the one thing that I found really interesting about this, despite kind of like how they ended up, they were part of a swingers community. So they had swinger parties too, which again, nothing wrong with being a swinger,
Yeah, good for them.
but
That's fine.
they are. Imagine walking into that house that I'm about to describe and preparing yourself to have a sex party with these people.
I think
Um,
the problem with being a swinger is like not everyone is attractive.
some of
You have to
them
be,
look like Harry from Dumb and Dumber. Yes,
but also maybe you like that. So you just have to kind of know what you're getting into. Like, don't be
yes.
surprised. If you're like, I like that, then like, great. But if you're like, I expect it to be something like really beautiful and like sexy, and you get there and it's like, no. But remember on Always Sunny when they go to the sex party, Danny DeVito's eating from the buffet.
Oh
Anyway, it's
yes.
gross. It's gross. That's what I'm imagining. Like there's also a buffet.
Well, it's not even their appearance I'm addressing here. I'm addressing the fact that you walk into what I'm about to describe as the house
Oh
to have
yeah.
sex with these people, and it's like, what could be going through your mind? But I'll get to the house, and then we'll back our way into like now. Imagine walking into this to have sex with these people. Um, so going back to the story, in 2011, David files for bankruptcy, claiming $240,000 in credit card debt. That's an insane amount of credit card debt.
What are you buying with that? Like a car?
I don't. I,
You know?
I don't even think you can buy a car on a credit card. I think you have to actually take out an auto loan or something. Like it's.
Yeah.
I mean, this number really blew me away. Because, I mean, sure, everybody has credit card debt. It's a thing. It is what it is. But this amount of it is
Hmm.
pretty remarkable to me, especially because
Totally.
when you factor in that he had a really good salary. He made about $140,000 a
Yeah,
year
totally.
as an engineer.
Awesome. Hmm.
Um, you know, I don't know if this detail is particularly significant, the debt that they were in, but I can
Hmm.
see why that level of debt could increase stress levels and kind of
Of
inhibit some
course.
rational thinking.
Yeah.
But I mean, what ended up happening kind of goes a little bit, not a little bit, it goes a lot beyond just stress related to some debt. But I don't know. What do you think about
Yeah.
that, Taylor?
Well, I also think like I know you're going to talk about it, but part of it is like they have a shit ton of children. So like I don't know, maybe think about your financial situation before you have 47 kids. Like stuff like that, that I think maybe also ties to the religion factor as well. Maybe they like didn't take precautions to not have kids, but like at some point you have to be like, I'm way over my head with this debt. I should stop incurring more expenses,
Yeah.
aka having like 7,000 kids.
Yeah, whenever I considered the debt piece of it and then looked at
Hmm.
what ended up happening, I was like, well, could this have been a response to like we just don't have the money for these children and this is
Right.
the only option we have? I mean, obviously that's not an excuse, but I'm trying to create logic in an
Yeah,
incredibly illogical situation.
totally. But if you like you have a dog, if you like are like, I can't afford to take care of my dog, you wouldn't stop feeding your dog. You would give it to someone else.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You'd
Yeah.
rehome it.
Yeah.
So going back to the story, they lived in Fort Worth, which is just outside of Dallas, Texas, until 1999. And then they moved to another town in Texas called Rio Vista. In 2007, they moved 10 of their children into a trailer on that property in Rio Vista.
Oh my God.
There was two other kids, so there was 12 in total, and the two youngest stayed in the house with their parents. The other 10 were brought groceries on a weekly basis, but apparently it wasn't enough food for all of them. This trailer eventually looked exactly like what you would expect when the family left it.
Oh my
From the way
God.
it was described by neighbors, it was basically like an episode of Hoarders. It was just feces everywhere, dead animals everywhere, food. It was filthy,
Those
absolutely,
poor
absolutely filthy.
babies. Oh my
Yeah,
God. I
and
can't
I
even imagine.
can't. And the thing is, I mean, how big of a trailer could it have possibly been? I didn't see it. I didn't get dimensions on it, but 10 people is
And
just
ugh, yeah.
you'd have to be sleeping on the floor, I would assume, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my God.
So,
Poor
yeah.
babies.
Well, the family relocated to Paris, California in 2014. People thought they were odd, but nothing super out of the ordinary. They would occasionally do nice family things. If you Google the Turpins, one of the first pictures you'll pull up is of them at Disneyland, and they're all wearing, Thing T-shirts, Thing one, two, three, four. They're wearing all of those, and they look normal, minus, David's haircut. Like they actually did some stuff occasionally together.
It's also so funny because that's so expensive. Like, I don't want to go to Disneyland with my four-person family because I don't feel like spending $4,000. Like
Yeah,
I
so I don't have kids, so I don't know what this would equate to, but could you rack up $240,000 in credit card debt by taking your kids to Disneyland?
no, but you could rack up like 15
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
if you went there for like a week and like stayed in a hotel and had tickets and bought food and like whatever and made those thing t-shirts.
Yeah.
It could be a lot. Yeah.
Going back to like the pictures these folks say, there was another picture that came up, which is of them getting renewing their vows with all their children
Yes.
in tow. You've
Hmm.
seen that, right? It's so eerie. It's like they're so pleased with one another. There's something about it that just like shook me.
They definitely look like, oh, we're so happy and we're so in love. And like we're renewing our vows and there's like an Elvis and they just look so super happy and you're like, what? I don't be pleased with yourself. You're doing a terrible job.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
So look up these people and see these pictures because it's a little haunting after you realize what those kids were going through while all this was happening.
Hmm.
Um, so they were both Pentecostal. They believed that they were called to have this many children by God. So kudos to you, Taylor. You kind of guessed why this ended up happening the way that it ended up happening. Um, I researched Pentecostalism and realized that these
Yeah,
are the people that speak in tongues. Are you
got
familiar with
it.
this?
I think so. Like I was going to ask you, like, tell me a little bit more about being Pentecostal. So, um, tell
Yeah.
me about speaking in tongues. It sounds hilarious. So just tell me
I I went down a rabbit hole with this because I was just blown away at like the belief
about.
system here.
Oh
So
my God.
these are the folks that think that the Holy Spirit inhibits their body, and they'll start just speaking in gibberish under the auspices that that is the Holy Spirit in their body trying to express itself. Um, there was I can't remember his name now. There was a huge mega church guy in Dallas who would do this all the time. He'd get on TV. I remember I used to watch this. I grew up in Dallas, and I would
Hmm.
watch this guy on late night TV just like doing gibberish talking to the camera, trying to get people to send him money. And then he ended up being found as a total scam artist and got sued by the government and everything else. But it's crazy. Like they fall on the ground, they roll around. It's like basically the shittiest improv skit of all time. And then people just buy into it for some reason.
but they don't know like do they try to like translate what they're saying?
No,
And I don't,
it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. There's
but they don't try to be like this nonsense means give me money and or they're just like it's just nonsense, watch me do it.
so you're kind of onto something on that last point. So the theology is also tied to the prosperity theology, which are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay, so this means that having material and financial wealth is a sign that God thinks you're great, basically.
Ah.
So, yeah, so if you're poor because God hates you. If you're
Mm.
rich because God loves you.
Got it.
Um, yeah, so it basically means that your faith in God is what brings you these things. And I find
Uh-huh.
it interesting when factored in with the bankruptcy because you kind of have to think to yourself, you know, were they thinking to themselves like, how, I guess I was wondering how psychologically with if you believe this stuff how would you
Hmm.
feel if you were also this destitute as they ended up being
Maybe you
um
ignore the debt and you like think, well, I'm rich because I can buy all these things, even though you're not, and you're like not thinking about like, oh, but I don't have that money, I have to pay it back.
I was actually thinking in terms of did they think that if they neglected their kids and spent as little as possible to keep them alive it would help them with God because they'd have money left over,
Right.
you know,
Hmm.
like it's not good, it's not good.
Yeah, no.
So the kids, so there are 10 daughters 3 sons all born between 1988 and 2015.
Oh my God.
um So towards the end of this saga, which we haven't even got to the house yet, but I'm gonna skip forward to that, how this ended up happening because what ended up happening, they discovered the house is critical here. So
Hmm.
as this saga is coming to an end and they're about to be discovered, apparently there was a bunch of talks of the family all moving to Oklahoma. I don't know exactly the details of what happened here, but in 2018, one of the kids, her name is Jordan, she was 17 at the time, fled through the window and ran a distance from the house before calling 911 on a cell phone she had on her. Apparently, there was some internal discussions amongst the kids who were all destitute together that
Hmm.
moving to Oklahoma for whatever reason would be basically the end of them. They would be their death. I don't know exactly what happened because it was already awful. It was already awful for this many
Right.
years, and what was the reason for this? The other thing I don't understand is why these how these kids had cell phones. There's actually multiple examples of this. I'm going to go into a little bit later, but the kids apparently had cell phones on them, and for some reason they were still running out of the house to
Did they go
make
to
the phone
school?
call.
Did they go to
No,
school?
no. What's actually amazing and really funny is David listed himself on some tax filing or something as a principal of Sandcastle Day School
That's
that
like
he
how,
operated from his house. Yeah,
oh,
exactly. It was his
gross.
house. And
Um,
he actually got a another conviction for falsifying records to on a official form because of
oh,
this
good.
principal thing. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I know you can get a cell phone, if you are financially in need of a cell phone because you do need one to like get a job and like things like that, so you can get one via assistance, but I don't know how they would have like applied for that assistance. I also know that you can dial 911 on phones that don't work. So if you have a phone that isn't connected to like a plan, you can still dial 911 on it.
So
So
that's actually really good advice for anybody, like if you actually need to
yeah.
do it. But I will say, and you'll see later on, that these phones had service. I'll explain that bit in a moment. Which
I have
again,
no
I
idea.
don't. I don't know how they got cell phones. I don't know why they didn't use them earlier. I don't know why they had to leave the house to use them, so on and so forth. It's all a little bit of a mystery. But Jordan ended up doing this, and the police showed up, and Jordan showed them pictures that she'd taken on that cell phone of the house. And Jordan told the police, quote, "My 2 little sisters right now are chained up. They're chained up because they stole mother's food."
Ew.
Imagine being a cop who heard that. I feel like I would just, I feel like, what? They stole mom's food? Crazy.
Well, I don't say mom, say mother. They called her mother like Mike Pence calls his wife mother. Like that's not great. Just like when
Ugh.
you hear that, you're like, that's bad. Um, I also feel like I mean, there's so many people who dedicate their lives to helping children who are in these terrible situations, but there's also a place where they like don't know what is normal,
Yeah.
So like maybe a lot of it, they're like, yeah, this is just our life. Like I've never seen a life that isn't like this, but also like it must feel terrible. It's just
so
terrible.
so I'm gonna go into that too because I thought a lot about that as well, and it ties into the cell phones and everything else here in a moment.
Hmm.
Um, so the police responded for a welfare check to the house and just found it in complete disarray. Obviously, it was also
Hmm.
what you would picture of a hoarder's house. Except the detail that gets me is that they keep finding dead pets in the house.
Ew.
Like they don't bury or cremate them. They just like live with them decomposing
Oh
on
my
their living
God.
room floor. I don't know what pets it was. It just said pets.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, no, that's so gross. Whenever I see that in hoarders, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, there's a cat skeleton in the corner." You're like, "How did we get here?" Like
Yes,
that's
seriously.
so much farther than like not taking out your trash. That's horrible.
Yeah, yeah. That detail. You're right. When I watch Hoarders, I also have that reaction. Is that's the
Mm.
one detail. It's like of everything else, that's the one I least understand.
I also just
Um,
love watching hoarders. I keep waiting for a new season. I've watched all of it. I want more, but continue.
yes,
I
same
think, yeah.
page. We have the exact same TV addiction. Um, so police witnessed one of the kids was shackled to a bed.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and apparently, I don't know how they know this, but apparently he'd been shackled there for weeks. I can only presume it was based on the reaction to the shackles on his skin that they would be able to deduce how long he'd been up there.
Hmm.
The details of what these kids endured is kind of beyond comprehension. They were obviously incredibly malnourished and extremely dirty. They were regularly
Hmm.
beaten. They were only allowed to bathe once per year.
Oh my God.
Go back to the 10 kids in the RV or the trailer, right? Once a
Mm-hmm.
year living in those conditions. They were also regularly shackled, as police had already observed, and they had very little understanding of the outside world. Apparently, they were fed only once a day, and they also weren't allowed to use the indoor bathroom. So I can only imagine there was like a shit bucket sitting somewhere inside the room that
Right.
these kids were in. It was,
Oh my God.
yeah, unbelievable. So I'm gonna go back to what you'd mentioned, which is their understanding of the outside world, and
Yeah.
also tie that into the cell phones. One detail as I was reading about this story and researching it was in 2014, Jordan, the daughter who ran out to call the police,
Yeah.
she saw a Justin Bieber video on her brother's cell phone.
Huh.
Yeah, and she'd also been watching Hannah Montana and High School Musical on this cell phone. So that point's like, hey, the cell phones worked. The cell phones had
Right.
service. So like,
Right.
totally don't understand how that wasn't being used. But can you imagine that? Can you imagine being that isolated and then seeing stuff like that? Like I get FOMO if I just stay on a rainy Saturday. I
No,
can't
totally.
imagine what it must be like. You're covered in dirt, wearing tattered clothes, starving, walking around in shit, and you see essentially the polar opposite. Like, I mean, I've never watched Hannah Montana, but I would assume that it is the polar opposite, right?
It is. Yes. I don't think
Okay.
I've watched it, but it is. You remember how our friend Jeff was in Hannah Montana?
Was he really?
Yeah, he was in like an episode where they were like playing volleyball for some reason, and he like won against her or something. Anyway,
I need. Oh, you know what? That does ring a bell. That actually does ring a bell. I need to go find that. Um,
um,
yeah, this
like what
part
would
of
you
it
think it
just
was? Yeah.
this part of it just blows me away. Of like you watch this stuff, you know that there's a world like that out there, and you live in this situation. It's incredible.
Hmm. Yeah, but just like how much have you been brainwashed to think that that is the life that you should live, right?
Yeah,
But also, doesn't living like that mean God hates you? I'm not expecting any rational answers from this, but I'm just saying that like if you're living like in poverty, God hates you, right?
but here's the thing. I mean, given how they treated these kids, I don't think that religious teachings were being imposed on them. It doesn't
Yeah,
seem
that's
like
true.
they. It seems like the Louise and David were having their own lives being run in parallel to like these separate lives that these kids were living.
Right,
So I
because
don't
he
even
like
know
went
if
to
they would
work.
interpret that. Yeah, he went to work. He had a great job. Like
That's
he
crazy.
was doing his
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so the parents were obviously arrested and they were charged with torture, false imprisonment, abuse of a
Oh
dependent adult, since several of the children were 18 or older, and child
my
abuse.
God.
The dad was additionally charged with lewd acts on a child.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Not that that's surprising, but oh no.
I
Yeah.
know, I know. They ultimately pled guilty. So originally they pled not guilty, and then they changed their plea to guilty. And they were thankfully sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, I think after 22 years. But apparently the general prevailing theory is that given the nature of the crimes, that there's no chance they would ever be released into the public.
Good.
Um,
And they're separated, right? Obviously, because she's in a women's prison, he's in a men's prison.
totally,
That's
totally.
awesome. That's great. I'm
Um,
happy they're not together.
yeah, they don't do much good together.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of an aftermath. So a bit of an aftermath as far as these kids are concerned. That's really depressing. So we're going to continue on that theme. It's kind of hard to imagine, but some of these kids suffered even more after this event.
What?
Obviously, the kids were taken away, right? Like
Yes.
they were taken away, and the state had to, well, the county had to figure out what resources to kind of apply to bring these kids back up to be able to live reasonable lives. The kids were obviously super fucked up psychologically and also had health ailments because of the lack of nutrition. They
Ugh.
ultimately spent 2 months in the hospital. It's crazy. It's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
This is where it gets bad, Taylor. So 5 of the kids were adopted by a family, and these people were utter pieces of shit.
Oh
I
my
don't
God,
know
I'm
how.
hiding out of the screen because I'm so upset.
Yeah, I don't know how you find people like this and not appropriately vet them, but apparently Riverside County didn't. The kind of abuse they suffered, I'm going to read the laundry list of it here. They were hit in the face, they had their hair pulled, they were hit with belts, they were forced to eat excessive amounts of food, and then when they vomited, they were forced to eat their vomit.
Oh.
And, it's a given, but we'll just tack it on anyways. The foster father was also accused of fondling and kissing them on the mouth.
Ew, oh, those poor
Yeah,
kids. Jesus
yeah.
Christ. I don't. Oh my God.
It's like how much can someone take, right? I mean,
And I can't believe there's people out there who are like, I'd love 5 kids to abuse, please. And
yeah,
they just been like waiting for that. And like, what have they done in the past? And like, oh God. Ugh.
yeah. It's really really bad. So the foster parents were obviously arrested as well in the mix
Oh
in the
my
middle of
God.
all this. But yeah, so this story has some parallels with cults. So I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
do a little bit of a sidebar here. I'm mostly thinking about hardcore insular poly marriage, whatever it's called,
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mormonism.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also thinking of the Children of God, who are now known as the Family International.
Mm-hmm.
So when I read stories about people who have left these groups, you're struck by
Mm-hmm.
the fact that they can't take care of themselves. Everything's done for you. You're part of a community, a bad one, but
Mm-hmm.
you're part of a
Mm-hmm.
community that everything's done for you. They don't know how to do the basic adult stuff, how to open a bank account, rent an
Right.
apartment, buy furniture, work a normal job, so on and so forth. That was all going on here as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually it's because everything was done for you, and then teaching basic life skills wasn't really good for whoever the leader was, whether it's
Right.
Children of
They
God,
want to keep you
Mormonism, or these
there.
people. Yeah.
Yeah,
The harder you make it to leave, the less likely someone is to do so.
totally.
And that's the impression I get of what's going on here. These kids, as they age out of the foster program, are kind of just dropped into the real world with no understanding of how to do normal things.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't blame them. I don't know if you remember what you were like when you were 18, but when I was 18, I mean, I didn't have my shit together until I was probably like 32. Like, you know what I mean?
Right. And you knew about the world also, you know. How old are you now? You're like 33?
What, in terms of maturity? Probably
No, in
33,
terms in
yes.
terms of you saying that you guys should do it, you were 32. I'm just asking how
Oh
long
yeah,
ago you
yeah.
think it was.
It's been 6 years. It's been a solid 6 years since I've had my
Not
shit
bad.
together.
Okay, cool.
But no, I mean, look, if you drop me into the real world, even without the exposure of abuse that these kids suffered at 18, I probably would have just died in the gutter. Like, there's no way I would have figured
Yeah,
my shit out, right? Like, nobody
absolutely.
would, I don't think.
I don't think so. I mean, what are you gonna, how are you even gonna know how to get a job? Or like and then if you don't have anything, how do you get anything? Like getting an apartment, you have to have money to even start, like there's not like,
So
it's so hard.
the story gets worse now that you mentioned money. So some of these kids ended up being homeless. Obviously,
Yeah.
Riverside County was the county that had jurisdiction over the kids, the child services, and were responsible basically their well-being. They were sued by some of the kids for placing them in that shithead foster family's house, and
100%.
also because this part I don't recall from when the news broke on this case, but apparently the public donated around $2 million for the
I'm
care and
sure.
well-being of these kids.
Yeah.
And
Where'd
what's
that
nuts,
go?
so it never was distributed. There was a
Mhm.
guardian ad litem who never distributed the funds. The kids would ask for it. They would never get it. And yeah, that's why the kids end up homeless in a lot of cases, because they age out of the foster program and they
Yeah.
had no resources to fall back on and no life skills. And this guardian ad litem, for whatever reason, abdicated her responsibilities and just did not distribute the resources to these kids they needed to survive. So
Oh
basically,
my God.
everybody failed these kids,
Yeah.
through
Yeah,
and
like I
through.
wouldn't I wouldn't say you should give them $2 million because they don't know what to do with it and they might just buy a house and like don't not take care of it because they don't know how, but you could like give them money for an apartment, and like, right? Wouldn't that be that guardian's job to like
So
help
that's the
them?
responsibility of the guardian ad litem. The guardian ad litem is that their guardian.
Yeah.
It's in lieu of parents. This is the person who is supposed to tell you, here's how you go get health care. Here's how you go shopping for food. Here's how you create a bank account. Here's
I
how
feel like I could
you
do that for them. I could do
we
that.
side hustle
Yeah.
is become a guardian ad litem. But and then also as part of all of that is distribute resources as needed. Like you have to make a case for it, right? You're not,
Yeah.
the guardian ad litem isn't just going to say, here's $2 million, good luck, go
Exactly.
at it.
Yeah. Which I think
But
is the right decision. Yeah. But
yeah,
you
but
should do something.
she didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's where we are right now. The parents are in jail, presumably for the rest of their lives, thankfully. The kids are unfortunately like not
Not
doing
doing
that
great.
great, it sounds like.
Yeah.
All this is fairly recent. So every now and then there's news stories that come up. I think the most recent one was December of 2021 about what the update is on the kids. So there's going to be more and more updates on this. We'll update this podcast as we hear more about what's going on with the kids. Apparently, one of
Hmm.
them did graduate from high school. So that's good. But, like when you're dealt a hand this bad, it's kind of tough to recover.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
so that's my story about the Turpins. And
Oh, that's horrible.
when I think about the concept of this being doomed to fail, I really fall back on the conclusion of the control dynamic between David and Louise.
Hmm.
I don't think Louise is a good person, but I also think that she was horribly emotionally and
Physically.
psychologically
Yeah.
and physically damaged in her
Yeah.
childhood. And so she hooks up with a guy when she's still a child who's 7 years her
Hmm.
elder and David. And I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that David kind of ruled their decision making. Whatever David did and said would probably work. And she doesn't have
Yeah.
any understanding of what a normal childhood should look like. Like you learn from
Totally.
what your parents teach you, and she never learned the right way to do that. And so,
Yeah. I think the cycle of abuse is what, dooms this couple and this family to fail because there's no, like you said, there's nothing like good to look back on and know like what it felt like to be like loved and taken care of and all those things. I think it's just like, and who knows if he abused her
yeah,
or she, like what that might have been like, because she seems super happy, but like she also is definitely in a weird situation, like the power dynamic of the 16-year-old marrying a 20 whatever year old. Like, I hate that.
yeah, yeah, not good. None of it's good. Hopefully the kids recover. And that is our true crime story of the week. So
I think a good takeaway is to look into your neighbor's windows and make sure they're not doing anything weird.
if you go to a swinger's house and there's dead cats and dogs in the living room, tell somebody.
Yes, tell someone. Like I think that's, if you think someone's in trouble, please tell someone. I
Yeah,
know that like we're not like the cops are the best. The foster system obviously is not the best, but you should definitely tell someone and try to do something. See
absolutely,
something, say
absolutely.
something. Yeah.
See something, say something. I love it. Cool. Let's pass it over to you, Taylor, for our historic doomed to fail situation.
Okay, well, that was terrible. Thank you, Farz. Um, Happy to hear that terrible story. So I have like 7 pages of notes I've been working on. Um, but today we're going to talk about Emperor Nero and Poppaea Sabina, who was his second wife. And so a lot of these word names are like a smidge Italian sounding, so I'm going to do a terrible job saying them. It's also a very confusing timeline. So just know that too. People spend their whole lives studying these stories and like writing books about them, and I'm trying my best. Um, so Nero was the fifth emperor of Rome from 54 to 68 AD. So we're going way back in the past, about 2,000 years ago. We're a little bit past when Jesus lived and died, but at least we're going up because I'm really bad at BC timelines. I like can't figure it out. Like I'm bad at time zones and I'm bad at BC timelines. So I'm glad we're in on the up and up. So 54 to 68, Nero was the emperor of Rome. Um, so Pompeia is his second wife, and
Are you saying
had
Pompeia?
Poppaea, Poppaea.
Okay, I was thinking about the Mount Vesuvius thing. It's different than that. Okay,
Yes, but that comes back. We'll get back to that. Um, so it's not a coincidence that her name sounds like that. Is
got
what,
it, got it.
yeah. Um, so she's a second wife. Having a first wife is not a red flag. You're talking about, that's fine. You can have a first wife. You can even have a second wife. It could be like have a divorce and it didn't work out and whatever. That's no big deal. Um, but so the idea of having a second wife, being the second wife, is not the red flag. What happened to the first wife is the red flag. But we'll get to that in a minute. It was bad. So to study and get prepared for this, I watched some YouTube videos, some Wikipedia, some other articles, and also per usual, cannot recommend enough Dan Carlin. He has a great million part series called Death Throes of the Republic that talks about when Rome was a republic up to Julius Caesar. And that's when they started to have emperors. So we're in the very beginning of the empire, the republic is over. So they get the background on the republic. Listen to that. It takes like 3 days, but it's totally worth it. And so it's a direct, next step in that story. So I want to talk about the background, the cast of characters, and then what led to their marriage and what happened after. Um, I also got to do the most exciting thing ever in my life. Now I can't find it. Oh, I got to reference my own library files. I was like, I think I've seen this before. So I got to pull a book out of my own library that gave me information that I needed, which is like my dream. So I'm
Let's plug
very
the book. What's the book called?
This is A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. It is a book about murder and death and humanity in ancient Rome. It is by Dr. Emma Southen. It is very funny. It's like funny. She's very sarcastic. I feel like she's probably younger than me. Like I could talk to her. She's awesome. So she wrote this amazing book, and it talks about like just how much violence there was in this time and the way that people saw other human beings. So if you were an enslaved person in this time, you were not considered a human, like at all. And a lot of people who were enslaved didn't look physically different than the people who weren't, because it was like spoils of war from like another part of Italy. It wasn't like African people that you could like see and really like make that a thing. It was like just other people, but they weren't seen as actual human beings. So they died a lot. People died in like the arena, and they died, working a lot and like to death, like working to death, and like for spilling wine, you get eaten by a lion. And people didn't think that that was wrong. It was just sort of like par for the course. So it's kind of like hard to understand because it was a long time ago. And we also have like very little actual details and information about this. Like we have stories that we heard like passed on and like bits of pottery and things like that. But you don't know exactly what happened. But it seems like, people like wives and children, like they weren't, treated like people. So if your wife dies, that's sort of a you problem. There's no like police force. You're not going to go to jail. It's like your family decide what to do. And if your family decides that means that you die too, problem solved, So it's a lot of like and there's a lot of murder. So it's violent, it's smelly, it's sticky, there's blood everywhere. Like that's the world that we're in right now in ancient Rome.
And what did we learn last week? If you kill your spouse, cremate the body before the autopsy.
100%. Yes. Don't like kill them with a knife that has your name engraved in it. Absolutely not. So, we see a lot of Christians being burned for fun. We see a lot of people like hanging from trees and on spikes, and a lot of death in here. But you just kind of feel you get the impression that people felt a little bit differently. And that's a lot of that is in this book, A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, that I totally recommend. But just kind of have that in your head that you have these like people that you don't. And murder isn't like you're not going to go to jail. There isn't a jail, and people get
Nobody
murdered all the
cares.
time. Yeah, nobody cares. Um, so that's where we are right now. We're in ancient Rome. And some of our, important characters, of course, there's Nero, the emperor. And to continue with our noodle analogy, Nero is like the spoon that you use to get noodles out of the pot. Like he's not even
Okay.
a noodle. He's like that like spoon with like the little fangs on it that you use to pull out spaghetti.
Can we? Okay. So you know what's funny is my head went directly to the spoon you get when you get ramen, the little boat tray thing. But he's
No,
not
that
that.
no, that one's lovely and gentle. I'm talking about the one like the big one with like the spikes on it that you use to
Okay.
like hand out the spaghetti. So that's what
Picture,
Nero is in
picture,
this story.
picture painted.
Yes, great. No, I feel like if we do find someone gentle and nice, they can be like a ramen spoon, like the spoon you get when you get like miso soup.
Yeah.
That seems like a kind spoon. Um, but so Nero, our emperor, his mother Agrippina, Claudius is his uncle and his stepdad and an emperor. So there's a lot of family tree stuff, very Game of Thrones that I do not understand. But I will try to clarify it as best as I can. There's Octavia, who's Nero's first wife. Pompeia is his second wife. And then some supporting characters. There's a witch. There's actually a fourth wife. And then there's a man called Sporus, who we'll get to.
Okay. So
Um,
Nero was married 4 times.
yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yes. Um, kind of five, the last two kind of go on top of each other. We'll get to that. So most of history talks about Nero as being just the worst emperor ever, just being violent and selfish. And some of the things he did are terrible, like all of the killing, lots of sexual assaults. Actually, he's actually a model for the Antichrist in the Bible. So some sects believe that when the Antichrist comes back, he'll look like Nero. Um, which means that he will be chubby and have a neck beard, because that's what Nero looked like. Even the statues of Nero, he's chubby with a neck beard. So you know that's like what he looked like and what he wanted to look like. So picture that. Um, and some things he did that are like bad, but like I feel like they're par for the course for an emperor in this time or like a supreme leader in any time. So it reminds me of things like, he's not paying attention to things happening in the far reaches of the empire. Right now, the Roman Empire goes all the way up to Britain. So, I mean, how is he even gonna know what's happening over there? It takes like months to get over the Alps to come back and tell him, and he just doesn't care about the empire itself. He cares about himself, and some of the things that he does involve him like being the best sportsman and being the best actor and being the best
Oh
blah blah blah.
no, he's the Kim Jong Un of. So
It's
that
exactly.
personality, is that what you thought of? That personality
Mhm.
trait seems to exist. It's ubiquitous with like power. It sounds like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wrote it's like Kim Jong Un being the best basketball player in all of South Korea. And like do you remember when Putin like went scuba diving in 10 feet into the ocean and found those like ancient vases?
Yes, yes, yes.
It's like
So
that.
so good.
So that stuff is like, it's bad, but I don't feel like that like makes him the worst. But what I do think is it is a red flag for a lot of shit happening underneath the surface. So
That's fair.
obviously, like we know there's like so many terrible things happening in Russia and South Korea, and they have these leaders who are like, "Hey, but I'm the best," and you're like, "People are starving," so you're not the best.
Kim Jong Un
So
is also chubby, but I don't think he has a neck beard.
no, I don't know if he can grow a beard.
Oh yeah, he
Yeah.
probably can't even grow a beard. Yes.
Yeah. But it's a very similar idea,
Yeah,
someone
yeah.
being like, oh my gosh. And then like when you watch like, I don't know, I watched a documentary of uh eye doctors going to South Korea and curing people's glaucoma. And after they would like remove the bandages and they could see, they would go up to like a picture of the Supreme Leader and be like, thank you, Supreme Leader. I'm so grateful for you that you did this for me, that you got me this doctor, and blah, blah, blah. But you're like, this could have happened like 15 years ago if the Supreme Leader allowed doctors in, like he what?
The
So
amount of brainwashing is just
yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that I think in this episode for both things. But so the stuff that he's done that is bad, some of it's legitimately bad, some of it's red flags for other things that are happening. Um Nero himself was born in the year 37. His name was ready. Lucius Domitius Inobarus. Nope, I can't do it. That sounds terrible. But he was generally a member of the upper class. That was his name. His dad was kind of terrible. He died when he was 2. His mother was Agrippina the younger, and she was very, very power hungry. Like she was like distantly related to the Julio Claudians, like Julius Caesar and Claudius, the first emperor. Um, and the current emperor at the time when Nero was born, um, Caligula was afraid of Agrippina. He was afraid of her ambitions, so he had her banished. And Nero got sent to live with an aunt, and he got tutored instead of by like a normal tutor, he got tutored by an actor. So he has this like actor who like was his tutor, and also actors are like the lowest of the low. It's like sheep slave actor in like
Oh wow.
the
Okay.
thing, like it's real bad. So he's like, brought up by this actor for a little bit. And Caligula is obviously gets assassinated because there's a lot of assassination in this story and a lot of
I would
murder.
assume. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next in line is a man named Claudio. Claudio, no, Claudius. Oh my God, Claudius in the Claudio line. So he's actually Agrippina's uncle. So he's Nero's great uncle. And Agrippina and Claudius get married. So she's married her
Hold on.
uncle. I know this is a lot. I
So
wrote this is
confusing.
confusing.
It's
I'm
just
confused. There's the new emperor. Caligula is murdered. The new emperor is Claudius. Claudius is Agrippina's uncle. So he's Nero's great uncle. They're in this like Julio-Claudian line of from the original emperors of Rome, going back, a couple like 100 years or so. Um, and that means that he adopts Nero. So the new emperor is now Nero's stepdad and also his great uncle.
it's gotta be so confusing, especially when you're being taught
It's
by an actor. Like that, if we can't string the logic together, some actor is probably not going to be able to string the logic of that family lineage together either, right?
totally. It's like a VC Andrews book. I just like don't know what's going on. But so now um the Claudius is the emperor, Agrippina is the empress, and also Claudius has a young son named Britannicus, who's a little bit younger than Nero. Okay, so now they're in this like incestuous family, whatever. And Claudius was right to be worried, about Agrippina. She was definitely wants to be in power. That's her whole thing. She wants to be power, but she can't be because she's a woman, so she needs to be, just like related to power. So she's married to the emperor, but she really wants her son to be emperor. So she cooks up a plan to kill Claudius. So Agrippina, Nero's mom, um, gets this woman who is super fun. Her name is Lucasta. I'm gonna try my best, but she is a poisoner. So she is the kind of person where you would go to her and ask for poison to kill someone. So you're like, my husband's abusive. I don't like the emperor. Like, I want to kill my rival. Like, she would give you the poisons. So she could do like all sorts of different kinds of poisonous things. She could make it like a slow burn or immediate death or like whatever. She was like this like witch who made poisons. I say witch
But
because like she feels witchy and fun.
yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. I love the witchy vibe.
Yeah,
But in this case, given where the request is coming from, she knows that she's doing something to kill the emperor.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
nobody
Yeah.
cares. Again, nobody cares.
Nobody cares. She knows. She knows. Um, so she gets Agrippina asks for like a slow poison that will kill him slowly over a meal. So not like drink it and you die immediately, but like start to get sick and then die at the end of the meal. So you could like attribute it to bad food or like something else.
I'm
But
I'm like playing out the whole story about like Rasputin's assassination in my mind right now, where he's just sitting
yes,
there like, please, when are you going to kneel over? When are you going to fall face first into your vat of wine? It's incredible.
exactly. And then what happens is Claudius doesn't die from this because he throws up. Because he throws up because he drank a bunch of wine. So if you drink like 7 casks of wine and eat a bunch of food, like you're probably going to throw up. So he does, and so he doesn't. The poison doesn't work. So Agrippina has to go back and get something that would kill him a little bit quicker, which is a smidge more suspicious, but it has to be done. So they do it, and Claudius is he dies, and Nero becomes emperor.
Do we know
So
what age Nero is at this point?
he's 16 when he becomes emperor.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that's exactly what we're talking about. So he keeps Locusta, the witch, she gets to live in the palace with him and just like be on hand to make poison. So I picture her like in Robin Hood Men in Tights, like in the basement with like, do you know what I'm talking about? Latrine.
No.
And Robin Hood Men in Tights, the witch's name is Latrine and she lives in the basement and like gives him like does like the bones and stuff. It's really funny. Um
It would be a fun
so
thing to have in a basement. It would just you have an in-house witch to go to
yeah.
whenever you
Oh
need
my
some
God.
potions. I love that.
I love it. I love it. She probably also did like skincare stuff, I imagine, like other fun things. Um, so she lives in the palace with Nero. He's 16 years old. So I'm glad you asked that because I did watch a couple videos where they like talk about him being 16 and how that is a very young age to become emperor and like imagine yourself at 16 and that kind of thing. One of the videos even like it was like a I can't remember, I'll put it in the notes, but a British documentarian talking about it and they had like clips of like young British dudes at the pub. And I'm like, yes and no. Like, yes, you're young when you're 16, but also I don't know what ancient Roman 16 is,
Yeah.
Like being a teenager is new. Like, do you remember learning that in school? Like you weren't
Yeah.
teenager became a word like after World War II. Like other 16-year-olds were probably married and had jobs. Is that
I,
like
yeah, like once you consider if you were like a single woman or girl at like 16, weren't you like considered an old man? I mean, the
oh
lifespan
yeah.
was so short back then, I would assume.
Yeah, totally. So like I don't know. I don't know if I can compare him to a 16-year-old now and say he was super
Right.
immature. Like he was definitely like not the best statesman of all time, but I don't know if his age is like as big of a thing as we can say it is. But he's young. Either way, like he wasn't going to do all of the work. His mom was. So even like a really kind of crazy thing is that they're both on the coin from this time, him and his mother.
Mm.
So which is like super unprecedented. They're staring at each other, like they're both the same size. So like they're both on the coins. Like they know that like she is a big part of this of ruling Rome as well. So eventually she's like trying to get more and more power. She's thinking of maybe siding with Britannicus, who's her stepson. Remember Claudius's son? So Nero has him killed. So he's out of the picture. He gets poisoned. And then he's like, his mom continues to try to, get power from him. So he has her killed. Um,
Wait,
Eventually,
he has his mom killed?
oh yeah. So that's a red flag, if you're killing a lot of your family members for power, I imagine. So
No,
he
the red
doesn't want,
flag is like the witch in the basement who's like constantly creating poisons to kill your relatives. I mean, why is nobody
find
calling
her
this
alive.
up?
No, that's definitely bad. But he could kill you at any moment in any number of ways. The first way he tries to kill his mom is he stages like a boat crash. So he like puts her on a boat, gets another boat to hit it, and expects her to drown, but she doesn't.
That's so
And then
needlessly elaborate.
I know, because he wanted to make it look like an accident, but he was like, forget it. He ended up ordering assassins to kill her and make it look like a suicide. But
Okay.
so she's
Gave the basement witch night off, basically.
yes, exactly. So his mom is dead. He's now like the sole leader of Rome. And now let's talk about his wives. I think this timing overlaps a little bit. Like he's married when his stuff is happening to his mom, but we'll just talk about his wives in general. So his first wife, Octavia, was his stepsister. It's very confusing. So, I mean, they're not related. They're step siblings. But so she fits into this
I mean,
family
it kind
pretty
of
as well.
makes sense because it's not like you can like if you're that high up in royalty, like your network is probably very insular.
Yeah,
Like the
yeah,
people that you interact with on a daily basis, probably like it's just like everybody that lives in this castle because you're not going to go down to the market and buy fish, right? So
yeah.
I guess it tracks. It tracks.
I mean, Queen Elizabeth married her cousin, so
Is that true?
that's the thing.
Wait,
Yeah.
Charles is her cousin.
No, Charles is the her son, but Philip was her cousin.
Philip, yeah.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay, I
like
didn't
like
know
maybe
that.
second cousin, but like not a great number of cousin. Don't get mad at me, England, but they're related. Um, So he's married to Octavia. She's a stepsister. She's also quite a good wife. She really wants to be subservient to him. She wants to help Rome. She like loves Rome. She loves like being a wife, all the things. And he hated that. So he tried to kill her several times by strangling her, because the people loved her and like that was annoying. And like he
Yeah.
just like didn't. She wasn't super exciting. They didn't have any children, so he kind of used that as a weapon over her because it'd been a couple of years and they hadn't had kids. So during this time, he obviously like has girlfriends and things like that. And he's trying to, he's doing other things. So he meets Poppaea during this while he's still married to Octavia. So Poppaea is from Pompeii. So
There
that's
we
where I
go.
like brought that up. They actually think that they have her house in Pompeii excavated. So you can like go into where she might have lived. She wasn't like there during I don't know when Mount Vesuvius erupted, but she wasn't there during that time, but they think that they have her house. I've been there. It's awesome. It's really fun to like walk around Pompeii. I don't recommend climbing Mount Vesuvius because it costs like 10 euro and takes forever. You get up there and it's just sand. It's not very exciting. But So she's from Pompeii. She's been married two times before, actually. There's actually a fair amount of divorce in ancient Rome, and it seems to be fine. There's no one has like any qualms about it. Her first husband was actually executed by Agrippina, Nero's mom, because she didn't trust him. So he was like in like the guards and she didn't trust him. So she had him killed. Now she marries her second husband, and they got divorced. So whatever. So she has one son from her first marriage, and she meets Nero, and it seems like this is the thing. Like they really like each other. They really want the same things. Like she's from like a noble family. She wants to get ahead. So does he. It seems like this is their love. They really, really like each other. So he gets her pregnant, and he banishes Octavia, his first wife, which I was reading it and I was like, well, that's great. He banishes her. I'm like, banish me to an island with
I
some
feel like
wine.
it's not going to end that way, though. I feel like it's bad,
No,
isn't it?
it doesn't. He kills her almost immediately.
Got
So
it.
he banishes her, and people are sad because they liked her and they miss her. So he's like, "Oh my God, I don't want to bring her back here." So he has her killed as well.
Ugh, yeah.
Um, so we thought for maybe he didn't, but like, no, he did. So
But also, Taylor,
he
if you get banished, you're probably not getting banished to, like Hawaii, right? Like you're probably getting banished to like somewhere awful. I would
I don't know.
assume.
I kind of think I don't remember where she's banished to, but I kind of think it's okay. I think you get banished to like the seaside.
Actually, Italy, yeah, there's not really that many bad
You
spots
know,
in Italy.
yeah, I think it's like Napoleon, like on Elba. I'm like, what are you crying about, dude? But like you still like want a lot of power. So people loved her, wanted her back. So he had her killed. Um, so he marries his pregnant Poppaea in 62 AD. And they generally like each other, chose to get married. She helped him with his reign. The Roman people didn't love her because they really liked Octavia. And they were obviously like,
Yeah.
this is suspicious and weird, and we don't love her. She also had a child from her first marriage that Nero drowned on a fishing trip. So that's bad.
So bad.
I keep saying things where like new historians are like, maybe he wasn't that bad, but I'm like, maybe he was. I don't like that stuff's real bad.
I mean,
Kill one child
it's
and you're bad. Should be the rule.
kill your mother, some child. I mean, yeah, talk about a family annihilator. Okay.
For real. So he kills that kid because he wants like the only kids of Papaya to be his. But unfortunately, the first baby that they have, she only lives to be 4 months old, which is kind of like par for the course, I feel like, for most of
Yeah.
all time. So, but now, Nero's only 26. He's not like it's been 10 years. He's like killed his mother, he's has two wives, like, a lot of stuff has happened, but he's still only 26. And then something crazy happens. Um, Rome burns down in 64.
I've heard of
And
this. Nero and the
yes,
fiddle, right?
exactly. Except fiddles weren't invented until a lot later, and he wasn't there. So womp
I
womp,
was,
that's not true.
I was lied to.
So he was actually at his beach house, like 30 or so miles away on the coast. And he did come to Rome immediately once he heard that it had happened. And Rome burned for almost 9 days. So what we see now of Rome and like Pompeii and ruins now, you see stone and you see like that whatever like the stuff that could survive 2000 years and survive fires and earthquakes and all of that thing, but there's also like tons of wooden houses. There's wooden houses, there's fabric, there's people, there's livestock, there's hay, there's so much stuff that can burn. So a lot of Rome kind of burns to the ground. The same thing happened, in the Great Fire of Chicago, where a lot of Chicago was burned down. The same thing happened to Moscow. In I think in like the 1800s, Moscow burned down because it was all wood. So a lot of it, what we see is just kind of what is left. So he did return to Rome. And one thing he did that was good is he did open his palace to let people in, which I wanted to note that Joel Osteen did not do. Remember that guy?
Yeah.
He's like
Yeah.
had a mega church somewhere, and then like there was a disaster in Houston, and he didn't let anybody in the church to like
He
stay
was
when they
trying to
were.
he was trying to preserve the carpet, which
Yes,
I mean,
right, and all the money he
not
had
very
like in the
holy.
walls. Yeah, the worst.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's worse than Emperor Nero if that in that case, which is I think is pretty bad. Um, so one thing that people are suspicious about in history is that um, after the Great Fire, Nero built a huge castle on some of the empty land. So some people think he might have done it to like clear the space for his castle.
I
Um,
mean, it's fitting with everything else you've said. I mean, I like there was like a little
yes,
caveat there saying,
yes,
look at him. He opened his castle up to let the people come in. He murdered like half his family and like killed his wife, the
yeah.
stepkid, the
No, you're
mom.
right.
Like this sounds more in line with his character than he's just a normal emperor.
Totally, totally. And he also like stuff like that. Like I'm saying like it's 2000 years ago. We don't know what life was like then, all those things, but also 6,000 people died making the stadiums in Qatar for the World Cup this year. You know,
I did
like
not know that. That's insane.
they brought people in from other countries, took away their paperwork and worked them to death. And
Wow.
that happened this year. So like there's still so many bad things that happen in the world that are very similar. It has to do with power. Um, so after the burning of Rome, while this palace is being made, Nero does the most hilarious thing, and he goes to Greece because Greece is part of the Roman Empire, and he goes on like a artistic tour because he wants to be like a singer and an actor, and he like wants to play all the instruments and wants to like perform. He brought a lot of like performance to like the gladiators and the arena. Like he had like if you're gonna have like a slave killed, like have them dressed like Hercules, so you can like make it more of like a story. So he really liked the like showmanship part of it. So he goes to Greece where they're having this like annual festival where every town and every place has like a competition, like who's the best singer in town, who's the best blah 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 in town. There's about 1,800 competitions throughout Greece, and guess how many Nero wins?
Wins?
Yeah.
Well, given his pedigree and that he was raised by an actor to teacher, he probably did pretty good. I'm going to say 1800. I'm going to say 800.
He won 1,800.
No.
He won all of because
So
if
it
he
was
didn't win,
rigged.
he's gonna get killed. Of course, it was
So it was
rigged.
obvious. Of course it was rigged. I'm sitting here, oh, my pure heart.
I know. Good for you. Good for you. No, like he won every single one of them. So he goes to Greece. He comes back. And people are mad. They're like, "Did you kill all these women in your life? Did you burn down Rome? Where have you been? All that." And during this time, him and Poppaea get in a fight, and it could have been normal. I'm sure that he was like not a gentle man, but she was pregnant, and the story is that he kicked her to death while she was pregnant, which is terrible. Um, the there's like other things people are like maybe she just died in childbirth, and the people who wrote the story hated Nero. But either way, it's not like he was kind to her at this point in her life, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Before
he
you
wasn't
posed.
great before this. So he was definitely abusive, and she died. He probably kicked her to death, which is absolutely terrible. So now things are crazy. Like now things are crazy. He's actually devastated that she's dead. And he like instead of having her cremated per usual, he has her like mummified, and he has like all of these. He spends all this money on like a huge memorial to her and all these things. Like he's very very sad that she's gone, even though he probably had a lot to do with it. Um, and the empire is crumbling. People are really upset with him. He hasn't been paying attention. He's been a jerk. He spent all the money on palaces and these like competitions that he was in, and he's never around. So people are like, this guy has got to go. So before that happens, I'm going to tell you the worst thing that he did. It's subjective because he's done a lot of bad things, but like, clear your mind. You never could have imagined this. So
I'm nervous.
so he's sad that his wife is dead. And he marries a woman named Stilitia Messalina in 66. And she actually turns out fine. She leaves this end of the story, marries someone else, and has a life. But she's not what he wants. He wants his wife back. So what does he do? He gets a young man who has an uncanny resemblance to his wife, has him castrated, and marries him.
Oh my God. That is
You're like,
pretty bad.
that is buried in a lot of the stories. And I'm like, that feels like the worst thing. Like, I know people died, but like, could you imagine if like you had a friend whose wife died and then later they were like, oh, here is this like person that kind of looks like her. I imagine him like wearing a veil and being like, I'm Poppaea, like
They just
it's
slap a dress on me and shave my beard and they're like, this is my new buxom wife. It's just incredible.
it's terrible. So he married him. Um, And
Maybe maybe he wanted to live that. Maybe he was like some poor beggar kid, and he was like, "Well, I get to sleep in the castle, and I get to eat and have clean water and wine, and I gotta just, I don't know."
well, there is no clean water.
Oh, well,
But maybe, but I feel like it's just, I feel like
your
it's
si
also,
your situation has to be like pretty dire to where this is an upgrade.
yes, yes,
So
yes,
it
it is.
probably wasn't an upgrade.
No, probably not. Because I'm sure that he was also very abusive towards him, like he was. And then he would like, this is all, I'm all making this up, but I imagine he would like beat him up and then cry and be like, I miss you. Like, it's
Oh
not
my
great,
God.
you
Yeah.
know? So, so he's married to this dude, and now people start like trying to kill him all over. People start, having all these revolts all over the empire. So he starts kind of running around trying to hide. He's like in his palace and he's like trying to find his guards, and they're not there. Like people are abandoning him, and he knows that he's kind of in danger now. So he decides that the best thing to do is to kill himself. So Nero plans to kill himself, but he can't do it. He doesn't have the guts. So he tried to be like, he's 30 years old, and he tried to say, my last words are, "What an artist dies with me," is what he wanted his last words to be. But he couldn't do it. So he had his private secretary, Hippolytus, kill him instead. And he ended up actually getting executed for murdering the emperor, which is super unfair because the emperor asked him to do it.
Yeah.
Um, and then the others tried to save him. And Nero, his words were actually, too late. This is fidelity. So like, stop trying to save me. I want to die.
Do we
So
know how he was killed?
I think he was stabbed. It was like a lot of like very
Ugh.
bloody, I think in the neck. So he only lived to be 30. And that was actually the end of the Julio-Claudian line that his mom was from. And then the next year in 69, there were four emperors. So it was called the Year of Four Emperors. So things were kind of crazy. They didn't really get their shit together until a little bit later. And yeah, I mean, after Nero died, Rome went through some time trying to figure out like what it was and what they wanted to do, but he definitely left like this a lot of devastation and a lot of death in his wake. And I feel like his relationship with Poppaea was so violent. He killed her son. He ended up killing her, and then he felt so bad about it and like had to fake her maid and all that stuff, which I think is crazy. That's it.
So one thing that I thought of when you first started telling the story about how violent and awful it was during this time period, and I'm thinking on like what life is like today. Is I wonder
Mhm.
which is the natural state of humanity,
Mhm.
and then you said something else that I think solidified it for me. You mentioned how he probably beat that kid who he had castrated, but then would
Mhm.
cry afterwards. He probably killed Pompeo and would cry afterwards. And it just reminded me of like every abusive relationship that I see a story happening of
Absolutely.
on
Yeah.
ID in Investigation Discovery of like this kind of a dynamic. And I was like, well, I mean, that still holds true today as it did back then. So maybe that is the natural state of people, is just being just crazy, and we just put rules in place to prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's kind of a wild story.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. It definitely was like, yeah, you're right. Because I'm like, you want to say like we're less violent than, ancient times, but maybe it's just more hidden. There's still like,
You
I
said
think there's
six
like,
thousand people died in Qatar. I didn't know that.
I think there's like 40 million people in slavery in the world right now.
That's
Um,
crazy.
so there's like a lot going on. We just like, we choose to not have it as part of our like daily life, I feel like. So
Yeah.
things have always been kind of awful, at least for the most part. In America, you can't murder your wife and get away with it, and your mom and your stepkid and your stepbrother. But maybe people have. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your takeaway? What's your red flag takeaway?
I think that like there's definitely like a takeaway of like, if everyone around you dies suspiciously, I'm suspicious of you, is a big one. And also that like quest for power and control of the empire being more important than family and relationships and people, I think is wild that you would just be like, I will kill anyone and I will, betray and poison and stab and do all these things just because I have to be in control. Um, I think that's crazy.
Hmm. I'm
What do
going
you
to
think?
extrapolate
Please
one
do.
layer beyond that to, I think that, okay, so everybody who got involved in this story obviously knew this guy was the emperor,
Mhm.
and obviously look, there had to be some inkling that he was a nut job who was killing people constantly and doing crazy shit. Um, and they still went for it. And so there's something around if you are drawn to personalities of power or to
Mhm.
institutions of power, it can have an effect on you where you subjugate your own logic of like, this could end badly for me because look at all the other facts in the story.
Mhm.
You might abandon that in the interest of being closer to that power or to that
Yeah,
personality.
totally.
um and so I guess check yourself if you start being drawn to that. You're like, why am I drawn to that, and what are my boundaries that I'm not going to overstep.
Totally. I think that's good for the Turpins too. Like if someone is controlling you and you're doing things that are objectively bad, um, how do you when do you check yourself? Because it should have been earlier
It
or
should have been
ever.
earlier. It should have been, yeah, exactly. And if you have a cell phone and you're trapped inside, please use it to call somebody. Um, so yeah,
For kids.
I know, I know. I
Poor
keep going back to
everyone.
that too. Poor everyone.
Yeah.
Well, that was our stories for this week on Doomed to Fail. Plenty
Yeah.
of red flags, and
Hmm.
thank you, Taylor, for your story. And we'll do this again next week.
Awesome. Thank you, Farz. I feel like I'm getting my stride and trying. I don't know what exactly my shtick is, but I'm working on it. But I like these stories. They're fun, and I'm like they involve relationships and just like crazy, crazy shit that happened in the past, which I think is really fun because it's like people are always the same and times are different, and it's interesting, which is why I like started becoming a history nerd in my old age. So
Which is why I became a true crime nerd in my old age. And the through line between the historic and the modern is kind of remarkable.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
we'll keep pursuing it.
Cool. Well, I will see you next week.